Hej, cześć, witajcie na drugiej lekcji w dniu dzisiejszym. Po krótkiej przerwie wraca do nas pani Aleksandra Kowalska z kolejną dawką wiedzy, o czym będzie dzisiejsza druga lekcja.
O Nowym Jorku. Będziemy mówili o Nowym Jorku. Welcome after the break. Now we're going to talk about New York and about a little bit about its history, a little bit about some fun facts or trivia, and maybe also about interesting places, tourist attraction that everyone should see if they have an occasion. So let's start with basic information about New York. So first of all, New York is of course located in the United States, right? It's located by Hudson River, and it's located in New York State. And actually, the whole name of New York is New York City because we also have New York State, and you need to bear it in mind. And it is situated on islands, on a few islands, and it is the most populated city in the USA with 8.2 million inhabitants. And it's not so big when it comes to the area, but the number of people is enormous. And it has got a few nicknames. One of them is, for example, the Big Apple. This name comes from the times when jazz was popular, from the 1920s. And the Big Apple was actually referred to Manhattan, to the place where you could earn a lot of money. And the jazzmen used to say that they've got a gig in Big Apple, and it meant they are going to make a lot of money. Pierwsza taka nazwa, którą możecie usłyszeć zamiast Nowego Jorku, to jest właśnie The Big Apple. I to jest taki jazzmeński slang na takie miejsce, w którym można zarobić dużo pieniędzy, i właśnie na Manhattanie można było zarobić dużo pieniędzy jako muzyk, i tak to jazzmeni nazywali. Next one, the next name that we have is Gotham, and it's been used in the 1961st. I'm sure you know Gotham City and Batman, and you can get the idea that New York was an inspiration for Gotham City. Czyli Nowy Jork był inspiracją dla Gotham i właśnie dlatego czasem tak się na niego mówi. The city that never sleeps. To jest miasto, które nigdy nie śpi. Because there is always something to do in New York. W Nowym Jorku można coś zrobić przez cały dzień i przez całą noc. To jest bardzo mocno żyjące miasto i tak naprawdę o każdej porze dnia i nocy coś się dzieje. I New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam to jest taka nazwa historyczna, bo kiedyś po prostu Nowy Jork, o tym jeszcze będę mówiła, nazywał się New Amsterdam. Okay, what else? It's divided into 5 boroughs, into 5 kind of parts or districts, you can call them. Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens and Staten Island, and I'm sure you've heard about all of them. And the mayor of this town is Bill de Blasio. And the interesting thing is that the borough of Brooklyn is so densely populated that it would be the 4th largest city in the United States. Brooklyn jest tak gęsto zamieszkany, mieszka tam tyle ludzi, że byłby 4. miastem pod względem wielkości, ilości ludności w Stanach Zjednoczonych. Queens, kolejna dzielnica, byłaby 4. takim miastem. And in New York there are lots of people from different countries and from different cultures, and you can hear even 800 languages in the city, so this is even more than we have in London. Czyli nawet więcej mamy tych języków niż w Londynie, w Nowym Jorku. And if you would like to travel or New York subway and go on every line to every place, it would take you 24 hours. No i metro nowojorskie jest bardzo rozbudowane, bo żeby przejechać wszystkie stacje i wszystkie trasy nowojorskiego metra, potrzebowalibyście 24 godzin. Przejdźmy do historii. So, New York City has got quite a long history, but not as long as Toruń, of course. The first person who is connected with New York is Giovanni de Verrazzano, who discovered the New York harbor in 1524, so he came to the area, to the mouth of Hudson River, and he discovered a harbor there and thought it was a good place to start some settlement. In 1609, an Englishman, Henry Hudson, sailed up the Hudson River. As I mentioned before, New York is over the Hudson River, and this man came to see the land that Giovanni de Verrazzano discovered, and he kind of went in a boat up the river to check where it starts. And in 1624, the Dutch people, they started a first town, little settlement in the area of New York. Czyli w 1624 roku takie jakby pierwsze, nawet nie miasto, takie osiedlisko, gdzie można było handel wymienny uprawiać, powstało i założyli je Holendrzy. No i tutaj przychodzimy już do takiej historii, która się robi coraz bardziej sformalizowana. In 1626, the first governor of New York area, Peter Minuit, bought the land, the island of Manhattan from Native Americans. I właśnie wtedy zakupiono wyspę Manhattan wtedy od Indian i właśnie na tym miejscu już permanentnie osadzili się Holendrzy. Zbudowali tam pierwsze miasto, no i oczywiście nazwali je New Amsterdam. I dlatego na Nowy Jork mówi się też New Amsterdam i pewno myślę, że jeszcze oglądaliście, może niektórzy z Was oglądali serial na pewnej platformie, na której wszyscy teraz oglądają seriale o tym tytule i taka jest nazwa pewnego szpitala, który właśnie w Nowym Jorku jest. No i teraz możecie też wyciągnąć wniosek, skąd ta nazwa się wzięła. Kolejne elementy historii Nowego Jorku. In 1639, a Swede called Jonas Bronk settled in Bronx, which is named after him. In 1658, Dutch farmers built a village they called New Harlem, after a town in Holland. No i widzimy też, w jaki sposób powstał Harlem. And the first settlement on Staten Island was made in 1661. In 1674, New Amsterdam ended up in English hands, right? And it was renamed New York, kind of to give honor to the Duke of York, brother of King Charles. No i jak przyjęli już to Brytyjczycy, to nazwa New Amsterdam całego miasta zmieniła się na New York, aby uczcić imię brata króla, księcia Yorku. Jak widzicie tego pana, to na pewno skojarzycie go też, bo był taki moment, kiedy Nowy Jork był stolicą Stanów Zjednoczonych, ale o tym za moment. In 1800, New York City had about 16,000 inhabitants, and it was a big city by the standard of the beginning of the 19th century. And the first newspaper, the New York Gazette, began publication in 1725. The first theater in New York opened in 1732. And on the 21st September 1776, New York was struck by a great fire which destroyed hundreds of houses, and George Washington entered New York on 25th November 1783, and this is when New York became the capital. In 1860, it had 813,000 inhabitants, so it was even bigger, and industry started, and because New York was in a harbor, shipbuilding started, and it was like one of the biggest industries in New York in 19th century. In 1832, the first horse-drawn streetcars ran in New York. Streetcar is another name for tram, but those were streetcars, not trams, and they were first introduced in New York. And also the first elevated railway began carrying passengers in 1868. Nie wszędzie są takie estakady dla pociągów, a takie pierwsze estakady właśnie powstawały w Nowym Jorku. I jedna z tych estakad teraz jest po prostu parkiem miejskim i dlatego to metro nowojorskie jest takie wyjątkowe, bo część metra, mimo że powinna być pod ziemią, właśnie przebiega nad ziemią i można też czasem podziwiać widoki. I przejdziemy do metra. So the first line of the New York subway opened in 1904. Czyli nowojorskie metro nie jest tak stare jak metro londyńskie, ale też już ponad 100 lat ma. The first telephones were installed in New York City in 1878. So that's an interesting fact. New York got electricity supply in the 1880s. Brooklyn Bridge opened in 1883. I'm going to mention something about Brooklyn Bridge later, but you can see it in the picture. It's a very, very famous bridge, and a lot of people walk on it and take pictures because it's like a must-see in New York. Okay. Another thing is the early 20th century Broadway became a place where theaters and entertainment places started working, and in 1892 the United States Immigration Station opened in Ellis Island, and I'm going to mention it later as well. In 1898, the 5 boroughs were united under one single government, the city of New York, and it had a population of 3.4 million. So before 1898, there were kind of separate cities, right? And from that moment on, it became one city, and the whole city was called New York City. What else? By 1980, New York had a population of about 7 million. I've got huge problems with controlling the screen now. Przepraszam, mam straszne problemy z kontrolą ekranu. Many famous buildings were built in New York City in the early 20th century, many tall buildings, and in the picture you can see some of them, and the 2 of them are non-existent now, and also many museums opened during the 20th century. And as I mentioned, you're gonna look at you can see the 2 buildings. Those two buildings were the Twin Towers, and in 2001, terrorist planes hit those 2 towers and destroyed them. And now, in place of these towers, we've got a museum, and you can also watch the site. It's a beautiful place, and but there are also other buildings which I'm going to talk about later. And what you have to remember is that in 20th century, New York was a really busy town and a busy port, and that's important to remember. And also, it became a financial center. I'm sure you heard of Wall Street, and industrial center for shipbuilding industry. And also, it started to be popular among tourists. So, as you can see, here we see the famous skyline of New York with a lot of skyscrapers, and in the foreground the tallest building is the Empire State Building, and I'm going to tell you about it a little bit in a minute. So the first thing that everybody who comes to New York should see is the Statue of Liberty, National Monument. The statue is nearly 34 meters tall, and the face of the statue is 2.4 meters. You can go up the crown and admire the view. It weighs 225 tons. And it was a present from the French nation to the American minister. He got it for kind of 100th birthday of America in 1884. And this whole museum of Statue of Liberty also includes another place, Ellis Island. And this building I mentioned before, it's very characteristic of New York. It's called the Empire State Building. It used to be the highest building in New York, but it's not now. It's got 102 floors, and it's I put 2 numbers. The first number, 1,455 feet tall, or 443.2 meters height, and this height is including this kind of antenna on top of it. It's in Midtown Manhattan. You can go up it. There are 2 viewpoints on the 83rd floor and on the 102nd floor. And the building was named as one of the new 7 wonders of the modern world by American Society of Civil Engineers. And it was built between 1930 and 1931, so it's quite old. The next thing that you should see when you visit New York is Brooklyn Bridge. As I mentioned, it's a very popular tourist destination. The construction of this bridge took 14 years, so that's a whopping amount of time, and it cost $50 million then, which now would be approximately $320 million. And the construction finished in 1883, and I read that on the first day over the Brooklyn Bridge, 150,000 people walked. The Brooklyn Bridge is a suspension bridge. As you can see, it's suspended on kind of lines, right, on ropes, and it is over the East River. There are many bridges in New York, but this is very special and very popular because it actually connected Brooklyn to Manhattan. And the interesting thing is that at least 24 people died during its construction, and also the man who invented how it should look died during constructing this bridge. The next thing that you should see, the next place, is Central Park. It's the 5th largest park in the city, which is 341 hectares, so quite big. And the park's a part of the park was opened to the public in 1858, so quite early. And it is the most often visited urban park in the USA. It's the most famous tourist attraction worldwide. It had 42 million visitors in 2016. And you must remember that Central Park is not only a park, it's got a lot of kind of little venues there, like there is a lake, there is a place where you can go rollerblading, they sometimes have ice skating rink, it's kind of divided into different spaces, divided to different things. So it's an interesting place, not only because of the green trees and grass, but also from all the things that are happening. Okay, the next place is Times Square. And Times Square is also a very popular attraction. It's a junction, skrzyżowanie. It's named like that after New York Times, because New York Times, the magazine, right, the New York Times newspaper, its original site was in this place. At the beginning, this street, this junction had a different name, but because New York Times was such a popular newspaper, and the place got named after it. And it is also a very popular place in New York, and it is visited by 360,000 pedestrians, so walking people a day. And another thing that you probably know about Times Square is the site of the annual New Year's party, and there is a very famous occasion and people come and watch the New Year's Eve ball drop at midnight in Times Square. And you can see it on TV because it's broadcasted. And this place is Ellis Island. I mentioned that I'm going to talk about it when I was talking about Statue of Liberty. And it's important because it was one of the first things that people coming to America, to the United States, saw between 1892 and 1924, nearly 12 million immigrants arriving at the port of New York and New Jersey went through this place. They went through this place to be registered. They asked them about their names, about their illnesses, about their families, about their countries. So before they actually entered New York, they had to go through this place, all the immigrants. And if you had some family, some relatives that in the past emigrated to the USA, you will probably find information about them in the Ellis Island Museum. And it's called the National Immigration Museum now, and it's open to the public, and it's not far from Statue of Liberty. It's like a one thing. And some New York trivia, so interesting information. So the interesting thing about New York, I mentioned that London is a city of rich people, but in New York it's not so bad either. 1 out of every 20 New York City people is a millionaire. So if you count to 21, the 21st person can be a millionaire in New York. And the average rent, so how much money you need to pay for 1 bedroom apartment in Manhattan, is $3,400 a month, not a year, right? So that's quite a lot. Another thing that you may know about New York is the New York pizza, because the first kind of pizzeria opened in New York, actually, apart from Italian pizzerias, in 1895, and it was the first such place in the United States, and from the United States it became popular all over the world. The Bronx Zoo, which you have in the picture, is the largest city zoo in the United States, and it holds over 500 species of animals, and 4,000 of animals live there. And what else? The New York City was the capital of the nation, as I mentioned, between 1789 and 1790. So for 1 year, it was the capital city. New York City is actually rainier than London, so it has more rainy days than London, and it was a shock to me because I didn't realize. And in New York, it is against the law for a man to go outside while wearing a jacket and pants that do not match. Pants or trousers, so you have to wear matching pants and jacket if you are in New York. And the interesting thing is that almost every street in New York, the New York streets have got two names, Avenue and Streets, and all of them are numbered, but there are a few exceptions, and one of them is the Wall Street, and the Wall Street has its name because it is named after an actual wall that stood in this place in the 17th century, and this wall stood in this place to discourage pirates from attacking Manhattan. So that's why the Wall Street is called the Wall Street and not an avenue or a street. In 2019, New York City will open, actually it opened, and the first underground park, and you can see it. And another interesting thing is that the Empire State Building has its own zip code. You know, zip code is usually for a town or for some settlement, for a village, and Empire State Building is special and it has got its zip code. So thank you very much. That's all from me, and see you on our last lesson next week.